Welcome to this Asia Global podcast, brought to you by the Asia Global Institute at the University of Hong Kong. I'm your host, Alejandro Reyes, the Institute's Director of Knowledge Dissemination. In our programs here in Hong Kong and online, and in the content that we produce, we focus on presenting Asian perspectives on global issues. This podcast is part of our Meet the Author series, where we have a conversation with contributors to Asia Global Online and other publications of the Institute. Joining me now from Yinchuan and Shenzhen in mainland China, respectively, are Rui Wang and Minne Deng. Rui Wang is the China representative for the charitable crowdfunding platform GlobalGiving, and is a consultant to the United Nations Development Program, UNDP. She's a co-author of the UNDP's Philanthropy for Sustainable Development in China report. She was a 2019 Asia Global Fellow of the Asia Global Institute here at the University of Hong Kong. Minne Deng is a program coordinator in China for the United Nations Development Program, the UNDP, and a co-author with Ray of the report Philanthropy for Sustainable Development in China. So welcome to you both. It's really lovely to see you.
Thank you for having us, Al.
Thank you.
Hey, now in your article on Asia Global Online, you write that during the fight against COVID-19, philanthropy in China demonstrated how it was capable of providing swift and effective responses that were highly sensitive to the needs of communities most, that were most in need, those communities most in need. And you go on to argue that as the Chinese economy emerges from the pandemic, the philanthropy sector can build on those achievements and become an important driver in the nation's efforts to achieve the UN sustainability goals, sustainable development goals. So Ray and Minne, tell us about the impact of the pandemic on philanthropy and in China in particular. Ray?
Yeah, sure. I'll go ahead first, but I think before we talk about the impact of pandemic on philanthropy, maybe it's put it in this way, there like a timeline logic, because actually philanthropy existed before pandemic, and then there comes the pandemic. Then philanthropy had a certain practices to fight the pandemic, and then after, or in some areas is still going on, there is a certain impact on philanthropy from pandemic that we can address and we can observe, and then to summarize. So maybe I will discuss a little bit more about the pandemic, the philanthropist's role for fighting pandemic, and Minne might share more like about the impact side, if you agree.
Fine, sure.
Yeah, I will focus on the China side because we know worldwide the philanthropist's role on pandemic is, I think last year, McKinsey had a report about the 5 practices that the philanthropists had in responding to the COVID-19, such as the reduce the burden for grantees and accelerated the pace and volume of giving, a partner and co-fund, as well as invest in local communities and support a public sector. China has no difference in general, but the role of philanthropy evolves along the COVID development. Right now, we're having 1-digit cases per day, sometimes no cases. So it's more like a contained stage. But I'd like to go through the process to share the different functions or practices that the philanthropy was taking throughout the pandemic. At the early stage, it's about purchasing and distributing the PPEs and organizing volunteers, collecting, analyzing, sharing more transparent or reliable information, as well as engaging the public. the key actors from the philanthropic sectors are the professional NGOs who are having or already had very extensive experience in the disaster field. So organizations like One Foundation and some local NGO center, also like Zhuoming, who was sharing information, and CNCDRR, these orgs, they had the experience from previous disaster work in China, such as the earthquakes and the flood, which actually enable them to deliver those professional first response at the front line. This is what we call the expertise of NGO, fast and efficient response that you mentioned at the beginning. Also very important, they are doing a pilot project for government or other partners. So when the government came in, the NGO may shift to next stage to pave the way for others. So that's at the very early stage. And after the pandemic was contained in China, philanthropists shifted their focus to more like a social and economic recovery. So grant-making foundations at this stage emerged to lead the work to like supporting individuals, particularly their beneficiaries, smaller NGOs, and together with private sector, they support some small and medium-sized enterprises. We all aware that COVID has disproportionately impacted the most vulnerable. So this is especially true for communities that were already severely affected by their social and economic status. Now or after pandemic, find themselves on an even more complex and daunting journey to recovery. So in China, it's more like migrant children left behind, migrant workers left behind, children, persons with a disability. So this is the focus at this stage that foundations who were used to in certain areas, they started to take care of their beneficiaries with more COVID lens. And the grant-making foundations are trying to engage private sector to support the orgs who are expertise in the certain areas. Another important piece I like to mention before passing it to Minne is during the post-COVID stage, particularly still going on at this moment, is advocacy and public education on the health issues, such as wearing mask, and the data privacy, such as how much you can actually disclose, the private information of a person who is having COVID. But this is still an ongoing process. We might share the real cases at the end if you wish. Also, beyond the domestic issues, we are aware that Chinese foundations have tapped into the international and programs together with other foundations or with the government to provide the PPE and sharing information, such as Save the Children. Actually, the China office shared the toolkit of how to deal with COVID, like a notebook or a guidebook, and that they share with their peers all over China right after China has contained COVID. So things like this happened. It's more to explore the cross-border collaboration that the philanthropists in China can do worldwide. This is what happened, and Minne might share about the impact side.
Yes, thanks very much. Minne?
Yes, just to continue Ray's points, I totally agree that by nature, we cannot say that the pandemic has made some fundamental change of the philanthropy sector. And but we can really see that like there's some evolving role of the philanthropy even during the pandemic, from like at the very beginning, it's like a service provider. It provides some volunteering work, organize some volunteers and provide some social service, and also like do the PPE things. And also then gradually it comes to some more deeper topics like the personal privacy, and also some even maybe go international. But so if you say the impact of the pandemic on the philanthropy sector, I would say maybe just two dimensions. First is from the topic side. Definitely healthcare and emergency response organizations related to this two topic have attracted increasingly attention from the public and also from maybe the authorities. And it might be easier for them to like do the fundraising and maybe to get to mobilize resource more efficiently and more effectively. But we still do not have enough data to support this point. We have to wait and see. And another point, just from my observation during the pandemic, that just as you mentioned before, like the philanthropy has made very swift response to the pandemic, and they care about the very vulnerable groups. That's because philanthropy sector and all these civil CSOs, they have the flexibility and to work to make the response and very swiftly, and they have some strong connection with the local communities, so they know their needs, and that's a reason. And how to better manage. And often these NGOs, these grassroots organizations, and a lot of online communities, groups, they just teamed up during the pandemic. They even did not exist before the crisis. And this kind of CSO, civil society organizations, how to better leverage their capacity, their strength in such a decentralized way, and to just work with maybe the governments and some more institutionalized organization, and normally they work in a centralized way. And how to leverage the capacity of this decentralized organization with the authority, I think might become up to be a question. There's a question mark of this, and how to better use their capacity. And is it possible? Since we just look back to the pandemic, we can see like in the first several days, maybe a week, like it's some civil society organization and some individual ordinary peoples, they were aware of like there's inadequacy, there are not enough PPEs in the frontier of the pandemic in Wuhan, in Hubei, and like they do some connection online or from their social network. And then after 1 week or half a month, then the government intervened, and they can use their administrative strength to do this in large scale. But the early gap was filled by the decentralized groups. So that's my point. Maybe, that's maybe something we can revisit. And
yes.
Yeah.
Interesting. I'm wondering if you could clarify something which I think maybe some in our audience might wonder about. When you refer to philanthropy sector, so are we also including basically charitable giving, regular people, or are we talking about more institutional philanthropy that we might know, or a higher level of charitable giving? I think that's a kind of definitional issue that maybe a number of our listeners might be wondering about.
I can say my definition of philanthropy, and all I'm talking about philanthropy is just using some private resource, either it's money or just like your capacity to do things for public good. So it can including donation and also like volunteer service, and also maybe some more institutionalized stuff. Yeah. And
so when you're talking about philanthropy sector, you're really talking about something probably wider than the philanthropy as might be defined, say, in the West at this point.
Well, for my understanding, even in the West, philanthropy maybe something is about like making donation. It's from a monetary side, and nowadays I think philanthropy is also in a much broader means. And maybe Ray can talk more about this.
No, I totally agree. It's how we often use private resources for public good. That's the definition. Of course, under different political, economic, and social context, each country or region takes it differently. But particularly for China, it's a more wider concept we're having. That's often we have a controversial discussion or comparison between charity and philanthropy. So charity is more about purely giving. More often a top-down approach, but philanthropy is seeing it as an ecosystem and actors if you want to see philanthropy from this lens is like the actors include individuals, institutions like NGOs, foundations, corporates, and as well as if we see the wider ecosystem with think tanks and as well as decision makers or policy makers like government agencies. So that's, we see it as a wider ecosystem. If that answers your question, Isle.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. Now, if I'm reading then your perspectives correctly, in some ways, from outside China, many of us who have been following how China has dealt with the pandemic, everybody kind of understands that China's done very well, and indeed probably the only major economy that's returned to growth last year. So in many ways, your message is that the philanthropy sector in China was kind of essential in that success, and that's an important aspect of understanding how China managed to deal with the pandemic, that the contribution from CSOs, from the philanthropic sector, from this philanthropy sector, was very important to that whole effort that allowed China to emerge fairly quickly from the pandemic.
You want to say something, right?
Well, I'm just wondering whether would you agree with that? That's that part of the understanding of China's success. Really, you have to understand the contribution of the philanthropy sector as a result.
Actually, I think you want me to continue?
Minne, go ahead first. Yeah,
okay.
Minne, go ahead first.
I think your point actually is quite related to maybe to the role of philanthropy in the overall Chinese development, also maybe the SDGs.
Yes, I think that's good. Yeah.
And also maybe that's something we really want to talk about today with Ray. So the role of philanthropy in China's development, you can say, essential. I'm not sure if it's a correct word, but I would say it's indispensable. Yeah, it's indispensable for China's development to make achievement, and especially from the social side for people who are left behind. And for example, what I see, I will still take the pandemic as an example, people have some psychological difficulties during the pandemic. If they are living in the center of the pandemic, they are locked down, they're at their homes, they have no access to the regular service they have, and also some medication they have. And what I know is like some CSOs, and we even could not call them CSOs because they are not like an organization. They are just a group of people, and they do some mutual aid. And I also see a lot of mutual aid groups during the pandemic. I would take an example like what I see on the internet is an initiative launched by an individual in an online community, which is very popular among the younger generation. They call the initiative like Mask Guard. The principle of the initiative is like you have to protect yourself by using PPE properly. And if you have extra PPEs, you should, maybe you can give it out to your neighbors who live nearby and they don't have such essential equipment during the pandemic. And when you do it, you have to follow some code of conduct, and they develop a code of conduct for people. You should not have physical contact, and you should do A, B, C, D, and E, and wash your hands after you do the delivery, such as that. And this kind, it's done in a very decentralized way because it's only done by an individual, and the person did not organize any group or even he just send the document up online and then leave it there. And then people, netizens living in different cities, they organized groups through WeChat, through social media, and voluntary. And what they have done after the group was organized was not quite more than just helping your neighborhood They can do a lot of mutual aid together. Since during the pandemic, during the lockdown, I think the connectivity, the sense of feeling connected to others is very important. And internet, and also just ordinary people living behind you or just on the internet, they can give you the sense of connection. So if you would say, so I think somehow philanthropy also plays such role. You can connect to others, and after connect to others, you can mobilize resource and do things you believe is meaningful. And well, that's, I think, the important role that philanthropy, I mean, in a broader definition, plays in China. They connect people and mobilize resource, and then people can contribute to certain topics, whether if it's related to SDG. And
interesting. Ray, in Minne, let's get that broader picture then, because you introduced the SDGs, which is kind of what I was trying to get at, the idea that we need to understand the philanthropy sector in China and that connectivity that you're talking about in order to understand not just the pandemic response, but indeed China's overall economic development and its move towards trying to address the sustainable development goals. So maybe Ray, you could talk a little bit about that, and then Minne after.
Yeah, sure. So Minne shared more micro level maybe examples. So if we see philanthropy as we often in our article and in our report we say it is a driver for SDG. It's more like even before pandemic. So actually, before this report, we wrote together, this is our phase 2 report. I wrote the phase 1 report back in 2015. So at that time, actually from 2000 to 2015, philanthropy has already played an important role in supporting the achievement of MDGs, if you still can record that old term. And later in 2015, when the SDG was implemented, the UNDP actually advocated for really tap into SDG with seeing philanthropy as a very important driver because the situation was on the one side, the unmet investment needs of the SDGs was estimated at that time, if I remember correctly, was between 3 to 7 trillion US dollar. So philanthropy was expected to fill the investment gap as an alternative source of finance. That's on one side. On the other side, within the 2030 agenda, if we recall the goal 17, which is partnership, embodied a deeper aim to actually foster, we called strong, inclusive, and integrated partnerships at all levels to address development issues. So philanthropy, again, was expected to help consolidate public-private partnerships, particularly moving towards more equal partnerships rather than the MDG model of a donor relationship. So under this big context globally in China, when UNDP China and the China Foundation Center launched the Philanthropy for Sustainable Development in China Phase 1, the project in 2015, there was a very clear goal of mainstreaming SDG within the philanthropic sector as a very starting point to facilitate the 2 key points that I mentioned of additional funding as well as partnership. So this is a history, what happened before the 2020 report that we're talking about, but maybe Minne can share more like what we observed for the 2020 report and maybe some extra role that we, throughout the development that we see philanthropy can play.
Yes.
Yes.
Great. Yes. Thanks, Minne. Minne?
Oh, yeah. I will take the flow from Ray. From the 2020 report, maybe I can just simply emphasize some key findings from the report. Like maybe you can, if somebody who has already read the article, we said like there are 4 SDGs that are mostly contributed by the philanthropy sector: poverty and healthcare, education, a sustainable community, and cities. And you can just find that, and these 4 contributions to these 4 goals, some are just overlap. You can see one project, charitable project, they contribute both healthcare and poverty, not only merely one goal. So I have to clarify that. And another, we can see another change is that the contributions to the environment related goals like clean energy and climate change, climate action, and like biodiversity and life below water, and these goals are like declining during the 5 years. And that's the quantitative findings from all the data mining we have done in last year. And another interesting thing, since we have also done a case study, we interviewed 17 foundations and we collect some very representative projects they have done related to the SDGs. The point I want to highlight here is that the philanthropy, yeah, definitely it can be a financing resource. And I think I have read a data, especially in some Western countries, or not in China, that the money collected through the philanthropy sector somehow maybe is higher than like the FDI. But in China, I think the amount maybe is not the key point. I think the role played by philanthropy is more like, because foundations, they make grants, and grants they does not seek for financial return. It's the biggest difference from the private sector. And this money they could serve as the seed money to catalyze the social innovation. They could like pave the way out and find a solution for some certain problems, and which is not bankable for the private sector and maybe even for the government. And so it can have a place in the blended finance and in impact investing, like some people already have been doing here. Yes. Now. Yeah, so philanthropy, I think it has an important role in social innovation and as a solution provider. Yeah, that's my point here.
Interesting. So in many ways, again, when people, outsiders, look at China, we tend to focus on, FDI, on the domestic investment picture, and all of those things that, the traditional kind of economic drivers of growth, as it were, or and sources of finance for a lot of the development that China's undergoing. But often there's not enough understanding of the contribution of the philanthropy sector. And I think that that's a kind of great contribution that your work has highlighted. I think it's very important. Indeed, tell us a little bit about the work that you're doing more broadly in this. Your backgrounds, the projects that you're kind of involved in at the moment. Particularly, Ray, you've got GlobalGiving. I mean, tell us a bit about the work that you're doing.
Yeah, sure. I am GlobalGiving China rep here. Well, I'm supposed to be based in Shanghai, but I'm now at Yinchuan, my hometown. I also do some independent consultancy projects with international development agencies like UNDP and OECD. But I like to share more about GlobalGiving because I see 2 key points at GlobalGiving as an ONGO, overseas NGO registered in China, as well as a digital philanthropy platform that we could actually facilitate some initiatives, particularly if we put it into a pandemic situation that has a special role in it. So as an ONGO, GlobalGiving was an American NGO registered in China. During the pandemic, particularly the year of 2020, we managed actually to disperse a total of 30 million RMB from the US companies, individuals, and US foundations to Chinese orgs, in particularly at the beginning of the pandemic. This ONGO registration and the way we operate as an intermediary actually enabled cross-country collaborations during the pandemic. which was sometimes people wouldn't see this, or they didn't even assume that could happen because of the political sensitivity or the regulatory structure around it. But it did happen, and there was a very dynamic cross-country collaborations going on there. So that's the ONGO role. On the other side, Global Giving is one of the first and the biggest digital philanthropy platform, or we call crowdfunding platform in the US. And with the technology, Minne mentioned about the power of crowd. We not only benefit the power of crowd, we also leverage the know-how and expertise of technology so that we could provide like a trust-based philanthropy, we often call, and a very efficient disaster report. So that is a combination of our crowdfunding platform. We get a funding from corporates, crowds, and we use the algorithms to do the vetting more efficiently for organizations all over the world. And we do efficient grant disbursements to the NGOs on the ground. So that's how we do it. And it's projects that I'm fascinated about, and I'd like to, of course, put more efforts and time on that. That's very brief about myself. Yeah.
Interesting. Now, Minne, what are some of your things you're doing? I think you're working on things related to SDG financing and philanthropy.
Yes, the team I'm working in UNDP for named SDG Finance team. And SDG Finance is a flagship initiative launched by UNDP like 2 years before, maybe globally. And I think the overarching goal of this initiative is to drive as much as possible capitals in both public and private to advance the SDGs. So there are several pillars under this initiative. Philanthropy, of course, is one of them. And so these pillars, for example, they have like do SDG budgeting. They want some maybe like incorporating SDGs into the government budgeting plan. And also they develop some instruments and principles for the market to encourage investors to do more SDG aligned business, etc. And in this initiative, I would say like they regard philanthropy more from a financial term. What's the role of philanthropy in blended finance, in impact investing? And I think it's also like implied in our reports, like the role of philanthropy, its nature of not seeking for financial return and its contribution to like pave the way of social solutions, etc. Yeah, I would leave there.
It's interesting because again, as an outsider, from China, that you think, okay, globally we hear of the trends or impact investing, ESG, all of these sorts of socially aware kind of financial initiatives. But then, of course, the outsiders think, oh, China's behind on this, right? That this isn't really happening in a place like China. But indeed, this is in some ways what you're a part of what you're discovering or learning is that the initiatives are really happening in China as well, and particularly philanthropy is as a driver of some of these socially responsible investing is playing a big role. Is that, would you agree with that?
Yeah, I agree. And I would say besides philanthropy, the socially responsible investment and the business is kind of is more and more becoming a mandate in the Chinese market. Chinese government, they have some regulations upon it, like some companies, A-share company, they have to disclose their ESG information after 2020. And also China has updated its green industry catalog last year, and they excluded carbon and this kind of fossil fuel from the catalog, etc. Especially after last year, the President Xi Jinping made a pledge of the carbon neutrality by 2016. So both the Chinese authorities and the market players, they are more and more keen to do something and learn something about the social SDG aligned business and stuff.
Interesting. Now, What's happening then on the ground? I think you both have some kind of interesting examples of concrete philanthropy that's going on in China that allows us to sort of understand I guess, the organic growth in many ways of philanthropy. Ray, give us a picture of what's going on in the ground.
I think we are, as I can say, we are at the stage that we are observing what happened in the past and see how NGO or foundations can play a role in addressing the issues that haven't been addressed enough, that could again pave a path for others to put resources or participate. I would just take a very concrete example as a data privacy that I mentioned before. This is also my own interest. We had, every time there is new cases found any place, the public official will disclose information of this individual about their where they have been, so that people will try to check whether they have been to the same places and voluntarily to share with the hospitals nearby to have a COVID test, so that we can really have the best tracking of everyone who has a close contact. The intention was good, but the implementation is actually at a very early stage. Individuals' privacy about their relationship, about their health, about their family condition, all these things has been overexposed to the public. And the foundation named Mana Foundation actually initiated a guidebook telling people the privacy importance of not only people who were contracting COVID, but also their family members, their relationship, all these have to be protected. And there is a guidebook about to telling individuals as well as communities, we call 小区 compounds, that have to apply that. And it was at very beginning, actually during the COVID, Mana Foundation had this guidebook, but then only recently, the Shanghai government started to make changes about how they disclose information, not by not mentioning the name or gender of this person, but rather the places that these people have been, so that you don't put a tag on the certain individual, but it's enough information for the public to be aware and then to voluntarily do their own self-checking. I think it's an improvement, but again, the initiative was taken by a foundation and some NGOs, and the cases like this will, I hope, could really to how can I say, to pay attention to the details that only NGOs can play a role. More skilled up projects are going on, but NGOs are taking care of the small little corners and leaving no one behind.
Interesting. Now, Minne, you already mentioned, I think, the Mass Guard project. Now, tell us a bit more about that and some of the ideas of community building that you're interested in.
The Mars Guard, I think, since Ray has made a very good point about the data privacy. Since I talked to the initiator of the Mars Guard just maybe several days before, and he mentioned data privacy as an issue as well. And because they are, when especially the younger generation, they use the internet, they use their social media to connect to people in the virtual world rather than in the offline world. And these people normally are not their neighbors. But because of the lockdown and because of we want to help out to peoples, and so they have connection to their neighbors, and this connection, but they don't, after they got established such connection, they don't know how to manage it, because neighbors, because you are physically very close, and not like other friends maybe live far away from you. So, and then because they have used some equipment to do the delivery of the PPEs, they have to enter their real name and their phone number and how to protect their personal information during such process, because they are doing something really good, but they don't want to, but they also want to be protected. So how to get such protection, if it's an ethical issue or it's a technical issue, that remains to still be a question. And yeah, I think just still related to Ray's point, we're doing the social distancing and we are doing the quarantine. We want to contain the pandemic. So data, sometimes our personal information data is collected for this use, but how to further protect that will be a big issue for our consideration in the very near future. Yeah, I agree
Right.
that.
And so that's really and that's an area where the philanthropy sector could in some ways set the standards or lead the way.
I think it's like small NGOs probably always rush to the front line because they have this flexibility, they had experience, then they are more resilient to failures. It's like a pilot project, I always say. But
Right.
once a certain standard was set or a pilot project is done, then other donors or big institutions may come and take it over to scale up. That's how it happens. So there are a test for before you make a big investment. I had a hope that the cases, example, the data privacy, just one example. There are others we don't have time to mention. But if I may, want to go from the micro a little bit, the
Sure.
context we're talking about philanthropy, actually, there is a background we have to be aware of. The Chinese government actually implemented its own national plan for SDG back in 2016. This is about how countries see they want to facilitate the achievement of SDGs. And then there are different provinces at the provincial level who have their own plan, which is aligned with the national plan. There were pilot zones like in Shenzhen as well as in Chengdu. And below this, there are like sector initiatives. Minne mentioned about ESG, and philanthropy is one of the sector that are taking SDG as a framework or one of the frameworks, and they wanted to align their work with that. And then below this philanthropy sector, there are different NGOs or foundations who are under different themes. Their themes might align with certain goals or multiple goals that they would like to facilitate the achievement of SDGs. Everyone has their different level. Everyone has their own focus and expertise. Altogether, we might hopefully to facilitate the achievements or at least contribute. That's how I would like to put a structure at the end so we know where philanthropy is from the big map and how the small initiatives can contribute gradually. Let's see by 2030 what the map will look like.
It is, so this is really interesting because when we hear about how the pandemic has played out in certain countries, particularly large ones like the United States or Canada, there is a factor in how the country deals with the pandemic has a lot to do with the dynamic between the central government, the federal government, or what have you, and the states and the provinces. Within this philanthropy rollout, and indeed in the bigger picture of the initiative to achieve the SDGs, tell us a bit about that dynamic. The central government. You already alluded it. The central government and the provinces. How does it work generally from your perspective?
Yeah, I'm not expert on that field, but I can just share my personal observation. So beside this SDG structure, for all the policy, for example, for pandemic, the central government comes up with a general policy. Giving you an example, what just happened before Chinese New Year, central government had a policy of advising people to stay where they are. And then if they wanted to go back to their hometown, what are the steps that local provinces should navigate. And of course, each province has different level of governance, we always say, and pandemic is actually a very good way to see the differences or the different style of governance of the provinces, state, if you want to say. Some are more like strict, and so I want to put it strict to everyone, so that I'm 100% sure no one can come to my province. Some wanted to have inclusive way, so that we do more preparation to check on the potential risks, and rather than make a big stop for other people's lives, ordinary life. So this is how each province navigating is very interesting. And then we see that the variety of governance, we have many discussions around that. And then a province are trying to adapt or change when they see there are better cases being shown in other provinces. So this is dynamic going on just for pandemic, and also what I have observed.
Yes. And Minne, do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I agree with Ray's explanation about China's policy implementation. Like the central government, normally they will raise a point which is quite general and the principle, and then local government to implement their policy in a quite localized and contextualized way. You cannot speculate that like Shanghai implement one policy in the same way like Yunnan, right? Because they have totally different like demographic situation and maybe economic stage, etc. So I would say the local government's policy implementation is really case by case, and it's also quite related, and just also different region, they have different development priority. You can say like some regions like coastal provinces, they have maybe less percentage of agriculture, and maybe like some central China province, they have high percentage of agriculture in their GDP. So definitely they will have different implementation plan to to achieve SDGs. And since it's just because China is so huge and geographically and also demographically, so yeah, I would say it's really a case by case question.
Great. Now, you guys have been very generous with your time. I'm just mindful that we've talked a lot about a lot of many things that you're working on. Tell us maybe a bit. We can close with a sort of personal question. How are you coping through this pandemic? I mean, I asked this to everybody that I've been having a conversation with. How are your families coping? And it's Chinese New Year, so this is a time for reflection. What are your thoughts in this Chinese New Year in a couple of days? Ray?
Minne, you should go ahead first. I always go ahead first. I am sorry.
Okay, Minne?
Oh, okay. Yeah.
What are your thoughts? I mean, you're with your family now in Shenzhen. How are you coping? Everything good?
Yeah, I think everything just looks very regular and normal after I arrived here, except I have got like 5 calls from the police station, and they check because Beijing currently has more case than Shenzhen. So people would think people who come from Beijing, they may be more kind of dangerous. And so they asked me if have you done the test and where are you from, etc. like that. And they except after they confirm I'm okay, so I can lead just I can have my life with my family, and it's okay for me. And if you say to just a reflection to the past year, I would say I changed my way of commute. I prefer not to use the public transportation as much as possible. And I bought a scooter, and I use the scooter to commute, since I feel it's more, it gives me more flexibility and safety. Yeah, that's my personal way to cope with the pandemic. Yeah.
That's good. And Ray, tell us a bit your experience and your reflections of the past year.
Sure. I think I was very lucky and grateful that Global Giving has adapted the remote working before pandemic. So when we started officially everyone to start a remote working job-wise, I wasn't influenced much. Actually, I got even more projects because many organizations started to look for independent consultants. So for the work size part, I'm very grateful. And life-wise, right now it's Chinese New Year. You can tell because of the new policy implemented, I was afraid of the different implementation. I quickly came back to my hometown because I just can't spare the situation that I won't celebrate Chinese New Year with my family. The biggest challenge for me is international travel. I do have many friends and people I care who are overseas that I just can't see them. And it's sometimes frustrating and heartbreaking. So I really look forward to see, the international travel resume certain levels so that I can start travel and meet the people I care, including AGI fellows. And hope that can happen soon.
Yes, well, we miss having our fellows here, and it's wonderful to be able to interact with fellows online, and of course, with all our associates like you, Minne. And so, thank you, guys. It's really been a pleasure. I learned a lot. I hope you continue to do your good work, which is fantastic. It's bringing a kind of new dimension of thinking about China to the rest of the world, which I think is very important. So I commend Ray and Minne's article in Asia Global Online to our viewers and listeners. Please come to the Asia Global Online website to sign up, subscribe to the journal, or go to the Asia Global Institute website to get our regular emails. Please follow us on social media, YouTube, LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook. You know the drill. Thank you very much, Ray. Thank you very much,
Thank you.
Thank
Minne.
you.
恭喜发财.
Yeah.
It's maybe a bit early. That's maybe a little bit early, so I don't want to create some bad luck.
Oh, it's
but
not. It's great. It's great.
happy year of the ox. It's so lovely to see you, and thank you very much for having our conversation.
Yeah, you too.
Thank you so much.
Thank
All
you
the
for
best,
having us.
Al.
Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.